From Sound Transit, I'm McKenna Asakawa. Thanks for watching our third video with Consultant Project Manager Dwight Schock as he addressed specific design questions about the project. In this final interview, I speak with Amy Pineo, Real Property Manager. Join me to learn about the property acquisition process, including details about how the process works and what property owners can expect moving forward. Hi Amy, this is McKenna. Thanks for being here today to answer some frequently asked questions from property owners.
Happy to be here, thanks.
Before we get started, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Amy Pineo, and I am the Real Property Project Manager for Sound Transit for the BRT Bus Rapid Transit project along State Route 522 and 145th. My primary role is to oversee the acquisition and relocation of all real property needs that the BRT project has.
And what do you hope viewers learn or come away with from this video?
I hope that our viewers or listeners are able to understand that Sound Transit has a very step-by-step process involved in any kind of acquisition or relocation of real property. There is definitely sometimes a notion out there that agencies just come in and take, and that is not what Sound Transit does in any regard, but we definitely have a process in place to keep owners engaged and informed and walk them through what our acquisition and relocation process looks like.
Now let's go ahead and talk about that acquisition process. Can you let me know what this process is and what property owners can expect?
Sure. Once Sound Transit has designed a project to the level of assurance of knowing what the project requirements are on any one piece of property, and that takes quite a bit of time depending on the scale of the project. And so it goes through not only external review processes involving consultants and design teams, but then it goes through internal review processes of Sound Transit, making sure that all project needs are accounted for. But only once Sound Transit knows what the need on any one particular property is, and it's been firmly set, do we seek Sound Transit board approval for the authority to acquire property for the project. And if the Sound Transit board approves the acquisition of any necessary property rights for a project, then our next step would be to contact the property owners. They are contacted in advance of that board decision, notifying them. But if the Sound Transit board approves that acquisition, then our next step would be to involve our acquisition field agents and our appraisal team. And Sound Transit contracts with 8 independent appraisal firms at the moment. And so it's really an assignment of what appraiser is best suited for that type of property and who has the availability. And so an independent appraiser would get in touch with the property owner and the field agent and set a scheduled time to meet everybody involved and come out to the property to begin their appraisal process. Usually appraisals can take around 2.5 to 3 months. That's a normal time frame for our appraisals to be completed. And once they're complete and they're delivered to Sound Transit, we then take that appraisal and we send it out to a secondary independent appraiser for review. And we want 2 sets of eyes on each appraiser, on each appraisal, just to make sure that there is concurrence with the methodology, the valuation, how the appraiser kind of came to that value. And assuming that both sets of eyes see the same valuation and agree, then that is the form of just compensation that Sound Transit puts into a formal offer to a property owner to acquire. And so they would take that dollar amount, put it in the form of an offer, and then the field agent would sit down with the property owner to present that offer. And we allow all sorts of time in terms of consideration property owners can ask questions, they can ask for additional information, they can have our appraisal reviewed if they would like to hire their own appraiser to take a look at it. Sound Transit reimburses property owners up to $5,000 for any appraisal related expenses associated with an acquisition. We also offer reimbursements for legal expenses should property owners want to have their attorneys review our documents. And basically all of the sort of review and conversation back and forth is sort of under the heading of what we call just negotiations. And our objective is to come to a mutually agreeable position with the property owner for what it is the project needs from that property owner in terms of space or property rights. And so assuming we can get to that place of mutual agreement, then property owners would sign the necessary conveyance documents and Sound Transit records those documents. And that's usually about 100-day closing period associated with any transactions. And so from there, then all the documents kind of get recorded and Sound Transit moves along with the necessary work in that space that is needed to complete the project.
Amy, what factors go into deciding if just a portion of the property needs to be acquired or if the full property needs to be acquired?
The primary driving factor of that decision is what the project footprint and what the project need is on that piece of property. And so it's all very project specific and it's all very design specific. But that is what the design lays out in terms of initial design is this is where we need to complete the project and this is where that need falls on this particular property. Then we go a little bit deeper and say, okay, based on this project need footprint, what is the impact to that property because of this need? There are some situations where the project footprint need is very, very, very minor in terms of the property as a whole. And so that category is something that we would consider to be a partial acquisition. We only need a small portion of the property, so it's a partial acquisition. There are some circumstances where the project footprint is requiring the property as a whole. And so that would fall into a category of a full acquisition. And then there's sort of a third category that can come up to where it's not really a project footprint that is taking up the whole piece of property, but because of that impact on the property, appraisal will come into play as to making the determination as to whether or not that impact is so great that it requires purchasing the whole property. And so there's usually three categories. Two of them are very straightforward in terms of whether it's a partial acquisition or a full acquisition. But at times, there is a third category where we rely on the appraiser and appraisal to weigh in on that determination. And so, again, no real cut and dry answer to this question because it is very property specific, but the primary driving force of making that decision is based on what the project need and the project footprint is on that property.
Can we also talk about access to homes and utilities during and after construction? Will access be maintained?
Sure. So typically there's no need to go inside anyone's home for any type of construction activities if we are not actually impacting the structure. The general rule of thumb for construction activities in terms of access or utilities is that part of the contracts that Sound Transit signs with any construction company who would actually be doing the work are the stipulations and requirements about things like access and utilities. We cannot at any point completely block access to someone's ability to get to their home. It might be temporarily detoured or temporarily shrank in terms of the full ability that you had, but we cannot block and cut off access to people's property. That's for emergency vehicle reasons, and that's for, way of life reasons of we cannot prohibit somebody from coming in or out of their property. Again, that's not to say that if, they're doing paving on a driveway, there might not be a short window in which it's, temporarily needing to set the pavement down and for a small window, say, this isn't accessible for this 2-hour window, something to that degree, that might happen. However, there's always plenty of notice provided if, in fact, that's ever going to happen. And should it really become a concern for somebody due to health reasons or life reasons, Sound Transit offers, stuff like temporarily putting parties up in hotels for a few nights, should they want to sort of escape this reality for a short period of time because of issues like this. But we absolutely work with property owners, and we absolutely require contractors maintain an ability for people to have access to their property. In terms of utilities, again, utility relocation is a very common reality of projects. And so if we need to move a utility like a power line or a water line, we do so, but only after the new system is in place. We cannot cut off utilities to a property. They have to have the new system up and running before they cut off the old system to take it out. And so that will ensure that at no time are utilities cut to a property.
Now, I know one big question on many property owners' minds is, what if after all of these steps and these many conversations, what if we still can't come to an agreement? Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's definitely not a situation that Sound Transit and Real Property go into hoping for in terms of an outcome. That's something that we try to work with property owners in any way possible to avoid. But there are situations that come up where we're not going to reach agreement. And so because of Sound Transit's agency status and because these projects have been deemed good for the general public and good for the greater public, Sound Transit has the condemnation authority, if needed, associated with their acquisition ability. And so that is what the Sound Transit Board actually authorizes, is the ability to acquire property under the threat of condemnation. And so if we get to a certain point in negotiations with property owners that we cannot reach agreement, then Sound Transit would hand the file, hand the specifics around that particular acquisition. We would hand it off to our outside legal department. And from there, it essentially goes out of Real Property's hands to settle the matter, and it goes into the attorney's hands to settle. And whether that's through a full condemnation process or through a mediation process, but it usually involves attorney to attorney settling these matters. And ultimately, if there is no agreement reached, it will go all the way through trial and a court will decide the outcome. But under the condemnation ability, it really becomes more so a matter of the price and the terms that get decided by a court versus actually Sound Transit's ability to obtain what is needed in terms of the base for the project.
Well, thanks, Amy. I really appreciate your time.
Of course, no problem. Happy to discuss anytime.